All right, real quick review of where we've come from. Remember Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. Remember each one of those is one whole book in the Bible, and we split them when we got into English. Well, Latin split it. Thanks, Latins. But they're really there for purposes, and we've covered these multiple times. But they are historical books, meaning real history is taught. They are for our example and instruction. Romans 15:4, whatever was written in earlier times was written for our instruction, that's the church, so that through perseverance and encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope. So it is for us, and we don't want to ever forget that. What you have in the Old Testament is twice as long as what you have in the New Testament, but it's just as important. It points us to Jesus. Remember, Jesus said that the Moses and all the prophets, he explained the things concerning himself, and that these things, the laws, the prophets, the Psalms, are all about him, meaning they all point in his direction. And so we're always asking, how does this lead us to Jesus? And then finally, we have to remember that throughout all of this, God is sovereign, and he's really working through his covenants. That's the kind of the main point. And when things happen, you can just think, how did God promise this was going to work out? And then it works out that way. But the point is, God is sovereign. We always need to think that whatever's going on, God is sovereign. God is the sovereign one. And we'll see that again here, again today, as Solomon takes over after David dies. Then it's all about, will Solomon follow God? Because God is then going to bless, or he's going to curse. The history that leads up to Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, remember Genesis 1 through 11, you have creation, fall, you have the flood. The first covenant comes in and gives us an idea of how covenants are going to work. We have all the nations that are established. When we get into Genesis 12 and beyond, we have the Abrahamic covenant that comes in that then starts to shape how God is going to bless the world. He's going to bless through this covenant family, and in order to get to the world. That's the idea. In order for them to enjoy that covenant in every way that God has given, they have to still be obedient. So there is a conditional element to it, but even if that particular generation is not doing what God has called them to do, walk in his ways, then they're not going to enjoy the Abrahamic covenant, but someday it will come to pass. So all those will come to pass one day, even though there is a slight conditional element to it. Well, that brings us to Exodus and Deuteronomy. Of course, the Israelites, or the Hebrews, end up down in Exodus. They get freed in Egypt. They get freed from Egypt by God. God then gives his law to Moses to run how the nation is going to work, and he gives them a covenant, or they make a covenant between the two of them. And this one is a bilateral one, so there has to be something Israel does, and then God will respond. And that works out throughout. God is very clear about that, so clear that he ends up killing the first generation and bringing out a new generation to go into the land, and he repeats for them the same thing. And so we have the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant that are really the main things going on here. The Noahic covenant's for all creation, it's for everybody, but these two are for Israel, and these are the ones we just kind of keep working through our minds. That in the Abrahamic covenant, God will never completely forsake national Israel, and in the Mosaic covenant, God will hold them accountable for their sin. This one is everlasting. This one is temporary, so long as Israel is a nation. When we get to Joshua through Judges, Israel enters the promised land. They conquer, they divide it, but then it descends into all kinds of sinful cycles. God rescues them often. We see that God is true to all of his covenant promises, and he judges them based on the Mosaic covenant. First Samuel then comes around because everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. We need a king. And so we have moved from a theocracy, which is God ruling, to a monarchy where God rules through kings. He already established in Deuteronomy 17 what the rules for his king were meant to be, and that's going to come into play again today. The first king was chosen by the people, a man after the people's heart, and it was according to their sinful desires, and God gave them what they wanted, and the whole thing ends up in, of course, being a massive disaster. A reminder that when we choose to reject God and do things our way, that is, build our kingdom and put ourselves as king, God will not bless that. Now, eventually Saul dies, but there is hope. God has already anointed David to be the next king. And when we get to 2 Samuel, this is the rise and the life of David and his family. during his reign, God then sovereignly brings about a covenant with David. David wanted to build God a temple. He had moved the capital city to Jerusalem. David wanted to build a temple for God to honor him and get God out of a tent, basically. And God said, "No, you're a man of war and a man of bloodshed, so I'm not going to let you do it, but I will let your son do it. But what I'm going to do with you is I'm going to build you and promise you an everlasting kingdom." And this is where the Davidic covenant then comes in and is also now happening. It's he'll give him a great name, he'll give him land, he'll give him rest from his enemies. It gives him a dynasty, a son, and the one that's most important is that it will be a forever covenant. So it will come. And so we have this kingly line that's now established with David. Anybody else who comes along, who tries to take the throne, who's not from the Davidic line, will not be blessed, period. And it's really important when it comes to going down through Solomon and then through the Judean kings. All this is an act of grace, of course, because David was not great. He had multiple wives. He was not a good dad. But God is going to bring about his promises. So we have the rest of the book. We find out at the end of 2 Samuel that God is a deliverer, and that's what David praises him for in those last couple chapters. God is a deliverer. Ultimately, that's how David sees God. And that ends with sort of a triumph then of God's grace. And then we walk into the kings. How is this now going to work after David leaves? Is God going to continue to be God or not? And we know that he is, because is he going to continue to lead, hold to his promises? We know that he will. The question then happens with us, and really the theme of these two books is what Elijah says in 1 Kings 18. How long will you hesitate between two opinions? If Yahweh is God, follow him. But if Baal, or we could say if anybody else is king, then God, then follow them. Okay? And then he proves, of course, that God is God. And that still holds today. And that's what you need to be thinking about. How long will you hesitate between opinions? Are you God? Is that person you're following after God? Whatever you're following, is that person God? If they are, then keep following them. But if they're not, you need to follow the true God. 1 Kings is an account of Israel's kings. And again, are they going to follow God and be blessed, or are they going to follow their own evil hearts and be judged harshly? That's going to be it. We're also going to see God's grace in there, because, remember, 19 kings of the north are not going to follow God. They're going to be as bad as Jeroboam, if not worse. But God's going to give them grace for 200 years to bring them back to him. So the Mosaic covenant is in effect, but there is also grace that's found within there. If you want to outline 1st and 2nd Kings, you just really need two spots, or three in this case. I put two in your notes, but it's very simple just to kind of get the simplest in. You have a united kingdom that stays under Solomon, and then the kingdom divides in chapter 12 between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And then by the time you get to the end of chapter 17 in 2 Kings, the kingdom of the north falls to Assyria, and then the rest of the book, chapter 18 through 25, is about the fall of Judah into Babylon. But when you're reading through 1 Kings, this is just the simplest outline to keep in mind as you kind of roll through that. The timeline, just again, so we have dates in our mind. I already gave you some of them. 1010 BC is when David is anointed king in Judah, and then 7 years later, he's anointed of all Israel. He dies in 970, and that's when Solomon is anointed king. By the way, all of this can be affirmed with historical records, archaeology, and all that, so that's why these dates are solid. 966 through 959 is when the temple was built. We're going to talk about that today. And 931 is when Solomon dies, and that's when the kingdom divides up. Israel goes into Assyrian captivity in 722, and then 586 is when Judah goes into exile as well. Okay? Do I have maps? I do. They're real similar. There's not a lot that's different, but basically Solomon's kingdom is David's kingdom, and Solomon's kingdom has just expanded further, really. So, this part right here is this kind of purpley part that he expanded to make Israel, but you just see his kingdom just got bigger is kind of the idea. And then when you get to the divided kingdom, It's split basically right down the middle. That's not exact, of course, but the Judah stayed down here. Philistia became a problem again. These guys all stayed here, but this was all the northern kingdom at that point. Okay, and again, all the northern kings were evil. In south, there were 8 good kings. 3 of them were they were good until right to the end of their reign. And Manasseh became good at the end of his reign, but he was pretty nasty before that. So, all right, into 1 Kings 1 through 10. Look at that cute little guy. This is my Solomon. Are you guys okay with this? No! Look how nice he is. Yeah. All right, so 1 Kings 1 and chapters 1 and 2 are really the transition from David to Solomon. Solomon is now securing the throne. And it starts, you can see, we need to make sure we look at our Bibles here so you know that I'm not crazy or too crazy. It begins in 1 Kings 1:1. Now King David was old, advanced in age. Okay? And by the time we get to the end of chapter 2, we read that the king was established in the hands of Solomon. So again, these chapters are from David into Solomon's hands. Okay? That's how I put these together. It's a transition text, and we have to see what happens. The first chapter and a half or so, which is those verses there, is Solomon becoming king. So David was an old man, which, if you do the math, he was only 70. So however you consider old, a 70-year-old man is what they call old here. I'll leave that to interpretation if that's actually old. But anyway, he's weak and apparently unable to keep himself warm, and so they go get a young unmarried woman to be his personal body heater. And it sounds really sketchy to us in particular. We don't do this that I know of. Some have suggested that there is some intimate connotations here and there's some bad stuff. There's some other commentators that say that the practice was actually normative in those days. That is that an old man who was weak and sickly, they would seek out a virgin for the old man to be warm. Because remember, they don't have electricity. You're not going to put heat under a bed like that because you'll burn it up. So they would go get a young woman. And the reason they would get a young woman who is because she would be, number one, healthy. She would be free of domestic responsibility. She didn't have children and a husband to take care of. And she was able to then be a sort of a maid to David no matter what time of the day. I mean, she was just available is the idea. So she'd just be a very, very close maid. The thing that makes me think that nothing's going on here is that David, in verse 4, it says, the young woman was very beautiful, and she was the king's nurse and attended him, but the king did not know her. Okay, this to me, I think, makes the second explanation better, that there's not anything intimate going on here or anything wrong. I think we have David's spiritual growth here. And because it was a well-known practice of the day, I don't think there's anything else here. I think David was just an old man. He was struggling with his health, and this is the way they did things, because it's the only way to get a heater and somebody who could be a heater for him. And David did a better job than he had been previous years in his life, especially as a young man, of keeping at least enough of a distance that it actually wasn't a problem. So I think there's growth here because it doesn't say otherwise. Some commentators disagree, and I'll let you figure that out on your own. Starting in verse 5, now we have Adonijah comes in, another one of David's sons, and what he does is he rallies 50 guys to go take over the kingdom. 50. That's not a lot of people. I'm going to go take the kingdom, okay? And again, who chooses the kings in Israel? God does, right? Deuteronomy 17. But Adonijah tries to force the issue with sacrifices. He did make sacrifices. He gathers supporters like Joab, who remember was David's military commander. He grabs Abiathar the priest, and he holds a whole feast for himself without David's approval that he is now the king. So 50 guys, and I'm the king now. It's not good. And again, we know this is not going to work. You should already know this as a reader. This is not going to work because God chooses the king. And plus, we already know from 2 Samuel that the throne belongs to Solomon. Now, David, of course, has no clue that this is happening. So Nathan the prophet Bathsheba, they know what's going on, and so they go into David and tell him what's happening, and they make sure David is good on his promise to Solomon. And after David hears of it, he says, great, go do it. Let's get Solomon anointed. And so after some preparation, Solomon is anointed by David. And by the time we then get to verse 38, that news that Solomon is anointed reaches the party of Adonijah. And by verse 49, all 50 people leave Adonijah. It was not a very long-winded coup. It happened, they had a party and a feast, and then they left. And that was it. And that's the end of that. Then when we get to chapter 2, then we have David's last words recorded for us in verses 1 through 4. David exhorts Solomon to be fiercely faithful to the covenant. So we can look at it here, verses 1 through 4 of chapter 2. Verse 2, I'm going the way of all the earth. You shall be strong and be a man. You shall keep the responsibility given by Yahweh, your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses. Why? That you may be prosperous in all that you do and wherever you turn, so that Yahweh may establish his promise, which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons keep their way to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, he said, you shall not have a man cut off from the throne of Israel. So again, this is going to be a major theme that keeps popping up for Solomon. If you walk in his ways, if you do his commandments, then you will prosper. Verses 5 through 9, then David goes into some kingly stuff. David tells Solomon he needs to deal with 3 specific men. Barzillai must be given favor because he supported David back in 2 Samuel 19 against Absalom. Shammai needs to be killed because he publicly opposed David, 2 Samuel 16. And then Joab, his commander, he just tells Solomon, you just wisdom. Like, you decide what you want to do with him. He supported David, but he still is a pretty untrustworthy man. He's a pretty gruff, you remember, he's a pretty gruff guy, and doing things he shouldn't have done, and then he apologized. You know, he's tough, and so God, he just said, you decide what you want to do with Joab, and then David dies. Which brings us to the second part of chapter 2, which here Solomon establishes throne. He does something about what David had just said, because after David dies, Solomon consolidates his kingdom. Adonijah, the other brother, makes a second political move by going to the woman who was the heater for David. Her name was Abishag. She was a Shumanite. He tried to basically capture her and marry her, and it was interpreted by Solomon as an act of treason. And so Solomon had Adonijah killed for treason. Abiathar is also removed from the priesthood, which fulfills the prophecy that was made all the way back in 1 Samuel 3 of none of Elijah's family is allowed to be in the priesthood. And so this is the final ending of all of that. So God fulfills his promise there. Joab Solomon decides to execute him for his past crimes. And then when it comes to Shimei, he was shown some mercy, and Solomon told him, stay in Jerusalem, and I'll show you mercy. He decides to run off, and that's not good. Solomon brings it back and kills him for violating the terms. And that ends chapter 2. The end of chapter 2 ends, thus the kingdom was established in the hands of Solomon. Everything goes a lot faster than it would David. It's consolidated, it's quick, and now Solomon is the king. And the first thing we then get to learn about Solomon is that he is a wise dude. That's what chapters 3 and 4 are. 3 and 4 are about the wisdom of Solomon. First, God appears to Solomon, and we find out right up front that Solomon has some work to do in his life. Where he learned to do this, I'm not sure, but some of it probably came from David, so you can see beginning of chapter 3. Then Solomon formed a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her in the city of David until he completed building his own house and the house of Yahweh and the wall around Jerusalem. The people were still sacrificing on the high places because there was no house built for the name of Yahweh until those days. So you had people sacrificing on the idols' temples, even though they were sacrificing to Yahweh. They were supposed to stay in the tabernacle, but that's not good. Verse 3, Solomon loved Yahweh, walking in the statute of his father David, except he sacrificed the burnt incense in the high places. So we're given something up front like this has got to be corrected. It's not that he's kicked out immediately. It's just that there's something's not right here. An alliance, an intermarriage. Remember, he's not supposed to multiply wives, permitting people to continue to sacrifice up in the high places. And he loved Yahweh, except he also sacrificed. So, application-wise, avoid except in your life, okay? This is a word you don't want. You loved God, you loved his word, you loved his church, you loved his people, except they also, did this sin. Avoid that. You don't want that in your life. It will come and get you. Time and truth go hand in hand, and you know that because you know what's come with Solomon. Well, God then appears to Solomon in a dream. This is grace, of course. And he says, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. And Solomon, in humility, because he loved Yahweh, he just asked for wisdom, which, again, should be how it is for all of us. We don't know enough. None of us are God. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how much you think you know. God knows everything, and we need his wisdom in all areas of our life. So we need to humble ourselves and keep seeking God's wisdom. Keep seeking what he's called us to do. Keep seeking him. This is why God blessed him. This is why God would bless us. When we seek him with all our hearts, God gives us what we need to follow him. God is pleased with this ask, verse 10, and he reiterates all the Mosaic promises. In verse 14, by the way, this is not a life verse. I'm going to read it so you know. This is for Solomon. If you walk in my ways, keep my statutes and commandment, as your father walked in them, I will prolong your days. In other words, I'll give you more life. Okay, that's not a promise to us, by the way. Many people die who are faithful, and so don't use this as a verse for you. But the point is, God calls his people, even kings, to walk in God's ways. And then we get to see his wisdom on display immediately. This is the weirdest wisdom display ever. And I don't think any of us would have come up with this solution. It's quite a doozy for any of us. I'm pretty sure all of us would have failed, and none of us would have suggested what happened. But it's proof that God is good to his word. He gave Solomon wisdom in a very bizarre, very hard, very emotionally charged situation. Two women come to him claiming the same infant as their own. And Solomon listens to them and then proposes that the sword be brought to him. He'll cut the child in half, and each part of the child will go to a mother. What a weird solution. But what it did was, and Solomon knew this, he wanted to expose the love of the actual mom and expose the deception of the mom who had lost the child and was just trying to be deceptive. And it worked. And the real mother got her child back. So again, it's weird, but I'm telling you, none of us would have thought of that. And that's what makes Solomon so great. And it answers prayer. We then get to see in chapter 4 Solomon's wisdom and the affairs of the kingdom. Solomon's kingdom becomes really highly organized, prosperous. Israel is divided into 12 districts, basically. Each one's responsible for supplying provisions to the royal household. Peace and stability characterize the land. Verse 21, from the river to the land of the Philistines, to the border down in Egypt, Israel is dwelling securely. Verse 25, each under his vine and fig tree, which is a picture of covenant blessing. They're just enjoying the covenant blessings of God. This is what the kingdom is supposed to be like, where you can rest at ease under your fig tree and not have to worry about war. Solomon's daily royal provisions are quite vast. He's got lots of wealth to deal with. His administration is huge. His wisdom just surpasses everybody. He becomes internationally renowned for the way he's running Israel. People from all the surrounding nations are coming to just listen to him talk. And it's just an unparalleled peace, a time of prosperity in Israel, flourishing. Solomon at that time, it says at the end of chapter 4 that he spoke 3,000 proverbs. We don't have all those. And he wrote over 1,000 songs. So he learned to write songs from his dad, obviously, but he wrote more songs apparently than his dad, which again, we don't have all those. But he was just overflowing with information about God and wisdom and all that. And so all seems to be going well. This is the height of Israel as a kingdom. This is what the kingdom should look like. And that's what Mosaic blessings look like. However, the Abrahamic covenant is still not fulfilled because, as I mentioned a moment ago in verses 20 and 21, there is still a land of the Philistines. There shouldn't even be a land of the Philistines. It should be Israel's land. The Canaanite people should not exist unless they have believed in Yahweh and are incorporated into Israel. So the point is because there is a land of Israel, or a land of the Philistines, there is no fulfillment yet of the Abrahamic covenant of land. And so it hasn't come yet. You just have to read that verse. There's another verse that tells us more is to come. All right, now that we have the land taken care of and the wisdom of Solomon is everywhere, chapters 5 through 7, really 8, have to do with the building of the temple. So this is, again, part of the Davidic covenant in which David's son would build a literal temple. Okay? And again, that's only partial fulfillment because we don't have a forever kingdom yet. And this really comes in 4 parts, and they're just kind of broken down into chapters. Chapter 5 is all the preparation that comes in. Solomon begins all of his formal preparations, and the way he does this is by wisdom. He goes and finds the best stuff, which in this case is in Tyre, which is up north, and the king of Tyre, Hiram, he supplies all the cedar and all the cypress from Lebanon and brought it down. And the reason he did this, he was happy to do this, is because it says in verse 1 that Hiram loved David. They had a good relationship, apparently, and so they brought it down. Solomon organized a massive labor force, 30,000 men to take care of going up and getting all the wood. There were 70,000 men to transport the materials. 80,000 men would go up into the mountains to be stone cutters. I mean, this was a huge project for one building. The chapter essentially emphasizes, as you read through it, because it just shows where all the supplies come from. The point of the chapter is to show that there is this time of peace and that God is beginning to fulfill his promise of getting a temple through David's son. Chapter 6 is actual building of the temple, the construction. This is a drawing of somebody figured out kind of what it looks like. But it began, as we can see in chapter 6, in the 480th year after the sons of Israel came out of Egypt. And so if we know that it started in 966 or so, then you just go back and with a little reading of 480 years, and you can find the time when they came out of Exodus. And then you can go look at history, and you can see all of that confirms. So again, this is a historical book, and it makes mention of that. It started in the month of Ziv. You guys know when this month of Ziv is, right? Ziv, anybody? April, May. It's springtime. Is the good time to start building a temple, apparently. And this temple, according to the end of chapter 6, will take 7 years and 6 months to build. That's a long time to build something, but that's how long it took. The temple dimensions are given to us, all the cubits and such. There's the layout, the materials are all described in detail, and it's all modeled after the tabernacle, but in just a larger way. This includes, of course, the holy place, which is the middle of the temple, and the most holy place, which is where God would dwell. Do you have the next one by chance? Yes! The holy place is this middle section here where the priest would go, the most holy, where the high priest would go once a year. And then all this out here and all the such. The middle, or the holy place, which is this section, and the most holy place, which is there, were all overlaid with gold, adorned with carved cherubim, which are a type of angel, palm trees, flowers. Again, the gold displays God's kingship, and all the plants are sort of a Garden of Eden. It's the place of perfect fellowship with God and communion with Him. Verse 7 of chapter 6 tells us that no iron tools were allowed to be on the site because they didn't want to hear all the clank, clank, clank. They wanted it to be a place of peace and quiet. so that there was a sort of sacredness to the project. So all of the building of the stone and all the cutting of everything had to happen off site, and then they would bring it on site and put it together. So sort of like ancient IKEA, bring it together. Okay, IKEA. Some of you guys built IKEA furniture? Come on, it's the worst. So it's, if you go back to the other one, it's 60. Well, this is fine. 60 cubits by 60 cubits in length, 20 in width, and 30 height. So it's about 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, 45 feet high. If you need help with that visual, okay, that is almost the exact measurements of a basketball court. So if you think of a basketball court, if you've seen one, the length is 94 feet. So it's 4 feet longer than what the temple would be. So that's not much. That'd be 2 feet on each side. That's not a lot. It's 50 feet wide, which is, again, 5 feet wider than what this temple is. And then most basketball arenas it's somewhere between 40 and 60 feet straight up if you go from the basketball court. So that gives you a pretty good sense. So if you take a basketball court and just the basketball court and go straight up with walls all the way to the top, that's what the temple size was. Gives you kind of an idea of it. So it's fairly modest size on the inside, but the height of it, to give the sense of awness to God, is the point. There's meant to be really impressive going up. Now, in the midst of all this preparation that's going on, and this is getting back to the whole point of this section, in verses 11 through 13, look at that. Yahweh visits Solomon again. And look what he says, verse 11 of chapter 6. And the word of Yahweh came to Solomon, saying, concerning this house which you're building, if you walk in my statutes and do my judgments and keep all my commandments by walking in them, then I will establish my word with you, which I spoke to your father David, and I will dwell among the sons of Israel and not forsake my people Israel. So again, obedience. Solomon, walk in obedience, and God will dwell with you. He'll stay with you. And by the way, just to look forward, so that, you know what's coming, but at this point in the narrative, if you're just reading this narrative for the first time and don't really have a sense of actually what's coming, because most of you know what's coming, Solomon looks like the promised one. I mean, he's asking for wisdom. He's building this magnificent temple. Everybody's at peace in Israel. In a moment, he's going to tell everybody, you need to be listening to what God says. We need to walk in his ways. So he's telling everybody that's what they need to do. And so the author's purpose, it feels like right here anyway, as if you're reading it in as a book, then it sort of raises your hope that maybe this forever kingdom is going to come through Solomon. Of course, we've already seen that Solomon has some issues from chapter 3. Solomon's going to fail. And that's the whole point. This raises our hopes in order to dash them, because Solomon's not perfect. Neither was David. We loved David, but we can't rely on him to be the king forever. It has to be Jesus who eventually comes. There must be another king. And so we have to look after David's life. We have to look after Solomon's life. And we're going to end up doing that with every king that comes through the line of Judah, who are faithful like David, but there's only one king that's going to come. Because by the time we get to the end of 2 Kings, the whole thing is a disaster. And they go in exile, and it's over, it seems like. And so I'm just trying to get us forward, because there will be a temple that's coming down someday, that in which Jesus, who will reign forever, will be in. And of course, the prophets saw that with Zechariah 6 and Ezekiel 40 through 48. So this temple's cool. Solomon's a cool guy, but they are not the king, and it is not the ultimate temple that is to come. Chapter 7, the building, we get to read the beginning about Solomon's palace. So Solomon builds his own home, his complex. It takes longer than the temple. Instead of 7 years, it takes 13 years. That includes his house in the forest of Lebanon, the Hall of Judgment. So there were a couple more pieces to his property than just the simple temple. Remember, the temple wasn't very big. I mean, it was big, but it wasn't as big as his home. And some say that indicates that Solomon, was being tempted by his own self-importance, and he twice as long to take all of his stuff. And the text doesn't say that, so I don't want to say that. It might have just taken longer because there were less workers. Everybody was focused on the temple. So if everybody's there, then the few people who could work on Solomon's stuff, then they worked on that. I'm not going to say more than the text says. Some people want to make some out of the grammar, and I just don't think it's there. If it is, I'll be corrected maybe someday in heaven. But anyway. Then they finished up the temple, beginning in verse 13. The chapter returns to the temple, describes the craftsmanship of all the stuff that's going on in here. Talks about all the bronze furnishings. Hiram gets in there. The king of Tyre gets in and starts doing his own work. He loves to work with bronze. And so he worked all the bronze finishings. He put bronze around 2 pillars that they name Jachin and Boaz. Jachin meaning he shall establish. Boaz meaning in his strength. So Yahweh establishes people in his strength. The 2 main pillars, which would have been these guys right here. Right there. So you remember that God is the one who establishes his people right up front. You have a bronze sea. You have the stands, the basins, utensils, all bronze. Again, all this highlights beauty, strength, order, abundance. And of course, then it all concludes with the completion of the temple. And they bring in silver and gold and vessels prepared by David to dedicate the temple. And that's what happens when you get to chapter 8. Chapter 8 is a very long chapter, and I'll let you read it another time. There's 66 verses in it, and it's all about dedicating this temple. Solomon assembles all the elders and the leaders of Israel to dedicate the temple. The Ark of the Covenant is brought into the most holy place. The glory of Yahweh fills the house to the degree that the priests have to stop ministering to the people so that God can fill it. Pretty cool imagery. It's signaling God's acceptance of the temple as his chosen dwelling. Verse 14 and on, Solomon blesses the people and explicitly acknowledges that Yahweh has kept his word to David by allowing his son to build the temple. This is his promise right here that's being shown to you. So if you don't think God keeps his promise, the temple is an example of that. Later in verse 27, Solomon recognizes that the temple can't actually contain God, but will God truly dwell on earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much this house I've built. So just reminding that, the temple represents a special presence of God as a covenant people. It's not limiting God to who he is in his person. Verse 22, Solomon then offers a really long prayer of dedication that centers, again, on covenant faithfulness, upon repentance, upon forgiveness, all really good, the right things. He repeatedly asks God to hear prayers that are directed toward the temple. I want to show you this. This is really cool. So in verse 35, he says, when the heavens are shut up because of no rain, then what are they supposed to do? They're to pray toward the temple. Verse 37 and 38, if there's famine in the land, then verse 38, pray toward the temple. In verse 41 and 42, if you're a foreigner who's come into Israel, what are you supposed to do? You are to pray toward the temple. And in verse 44, if you're about to go into battle, pray toward the temple. And in verse 46, if you've sinned and you need to seek forgiveness, then verse 48, pray toward the temple. Again, the temple is not the thing that saves you, but it's a reminder of God's presence among the people. So in situations of sin, defeat, drought, famine, exile, even just petitions from foreigners, they need to turn their prayer toward where God is, where God dwells. Yes?
Is that why when Daniel was in exile, he faced his...
Yes, exactly. And that's, yeah. And there's a whole rabbit trail I want to go on. I'm not going to, but yes.
So it is a physical turning.
Yes, in that case it is. Now we don't have a temple now. The temple has now become, we can't turn to ourselves. But the point is we have the Holy Spirit in us now, and so we can just go right to God. We don't have a direction. We have to turn, okay, to pray to God. The prayer underscores Israel's enjoyment of temple blessings are still conditional upon covenant obedience. But it anticipates future failure. They're going to sin again. And the temple is going to need to be rebuilt and all that. But the temple is where God dwells. And that's why you have to have a temple in the end, by the way, is because it is the place where God dwells. It's where Jesus is going to dwell once the New Jerusalem comes and all that. And so that has to come back. The chapter concludes with a massive sacrifice. 22,000 oxen, 120,000 sheep. It was just a bloodbath at that point because they have to remind themselves that number one, it's a good aroma to God, but also reminds them of God's grace in forgiving them. And by the way, this is very interesting. This whole thing, verse 65, went on for 14 days. This is a 14-day party. You ever been part of a 14-day party? No. This would be exhausting, right? Like to go on and on and on for 14 days. I go to a wedding for a few hours and I'm ready to go home after 3 or 4 hours or whatever it may be. This was 14 days. And you think they'd be exhausted, but look at verse 66. I love a note like this. On the 8th day, he sent the people away, and they blessed the king. They went to their tents with gladness and goodness of heart because of the goodness that Yahweh had shown David, his servant, and all his people. So in the middle of all this, he's like, okay, guys, go rest and whatever. And everyone was like, yeah, this is the best. We'll come back tomorrow. And they're just having a good time. And so if you ever have a 14-day party that can do that, this is when you do it. Just remembering the goodness of God gives gladness in our hearts in that. All right, chapters 9 and 10 finish everything off. The beginning of chapter 9 is the final. Again, God comes to Solomon once again. This is the 4th time that he's come to Solomon again. One was through David, and then the other 3 were Yahweh directly. And he reminds him again that at the completion of the temple, that he's consecrated it, God has. He's placed his name there, but there's a warning. Solomon's dynasty and Israel's enjoyment of the land and of his presence are still conditional upon obedience. If Solomon and his sons turn to idolatry, God will cut them off and they will go among the nations. They will go into exile. So God is not unclear. Okay? We can never say God didn't say so, because he definitely does. And then the final bit from verses 10 of chapter 9 all the way through chapter 10, it just goes on to show some more wisdom and just describe this incredible kingdom. Chapter 9, he just more achievements, fortified cities, labor policies, international arrangements. He was just a really good political king in that way. He knew what he was doing. Chapter 10, you get this, maybe it's the height of Solomon's glory, where an international round where the Queen of Sheba, by the way, we don't really know where Sheba's at. There's a suggestion it's probably modern-day Yemen. That's based on some archaeology, but not really sure where this woman was at. But anyway, she comes to test Solomon's wisdom, and she is overwhelmed by his insight and his wisdom and the way he's ordered his kingdom, and she blesses Yahweh for placing Solomon on the throne. She is amazed that God has done that. Solomon's wealth, his trade networks, his splendor, all described in chapter 10 in lots of detail, emphasizes just that Israel is now elevated among all the nations. Again, this is the height of the kingdom. And yet, we still have to be reminded, as usual, that the accumulation of gold and horses and luxury is a warning sign because of Deuteronomy 17. So remember, we got to keep that in mind. You're not supposed to multiply wives, which he seems to be doing, and then all this wealth that he has gained is also extremely concerning. And so even though there's a lot of glory going on for God's sake, you still have this hold on a minute. There seems to be something possibly rotten that's also still going on. And I think you then have a foreshadow that you're like, wait, we need to be careful about lifting this guy too high because of these issues. The point of chapters 9 and 10 is it presents Solomon's reign as magnificent, and it's meant to be a foretaste of what the kingdom is going to look like in the millennium. We really only need to walk away with one thing, and I've said it multiple times, but you need to walk in God's ways, and you'll be wise and blessed. Again, he was told by his dad, God came to him 3 times, and told him that if you follow my way, you'll be blessed. That's major. You can't read this section without that warning ringing through your head as an obvious application. Now, we're not under the same covenant as Solomon. We're not under the Mosaic covenant. We're under the new covenant with the law of Christ, but the point is still the same, and that's why I put up James 3. James 3 was the first book written in the New Testament. Okay, if you need a little Bible quiz there. James was the very first book written, probably late 40s AD. And James got after this comment that this is still true for us in the new covenant. Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show it by his good conduct, his works in the gentleness of wisdom. James is all about conduct. If you read his book, that's what it's about. It's about conduct. It's about your life. It's about working out faith in the way that you live, which is really interesting because James, the book of James, is not primarily doctrinal in nature. It doesn't really break any ground. Paul will do that later. John, Luke, Peter, and such will articulate and clarify church doctrine. But all of that doesn't mean anything. Doctrine means nothing. And even as we find out with Solomon, wisdom means absolutely nothing. You can be the smartest dude ever, Solomon. You'll never be smarter than him. Ever. Nobody will. And yet, he isn't living it out, which is why the warnings come over and over and over to him, because he can't say he wasn't warned. True faith is more than a verbal confession. It's more than just a mental agreement of what the Bible says. True faith is more than just an emotional experience. And all those things are true of faith. True faith is even beyond just doctrinal facts and adherence and even the ability to articulate doctrine and argue for it. True faith is greater even than wisdom because real faith acts. It's about your good conduct and the gentleness of wisdom, which is being able to articulate in a kind way. It's about your works. It really is. It's observable in your life. True faith bears good life fruit. Okay? James lays all that out, and he says it in multiple ways. Real faith puts away sin. And again, all of this should have applied to Solomon, but it didn't. Puts away sin. It bridles the tongue. It cares for those who are most vulnerable. It rests in God's goodness, even in trials that don't make sense. True faith is humble, not prideful. It prays, and on and on and on. It's a doer of the word. Okay? You can know everything about the Bible. You could be the smartest dude ever and still not be a doer, and your faith will lack. So that's what I think is a good, helpful. Solomon's a super smart dude, but he was not smart enough to not stay away from sin. And you have to be smart for God's sake. Don't depend on your ability and your smartness and your brain. Depend upon God to walk by faith.